This is it. The day of the big Asian tour debrief. So sit down, relax, put your feet up, and let's get started. All you travel nerds are in for a real treat. My just completed Asian tour started on September 10th, and I returned to the United States on December 17th. So it's just a tad over a 3-month trip. I flew from Newark to Singapore and then finally into Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. But the real story starts here in Carbondale, because I thought in order to get to the Newark airport, I would try something a little bit different. I booked a seat on a bus that would take me from Scranton to the Newark bus station. From there, I would get an Uber to the hotel, and then the following day, I would take the hotel shuttle from there to the airport. I got an email saying that the bus that I had selected didn't run anymore for operational reasons, but they suggested another bus. It wasn't a direct bus from Scranton to Newark. It had a stop at the New York Port Authority building, which is a massive bus transport area in New York City, right downtown in Manhattan. On the day of the trip, the Greyhound bus was late. It was supposed to leave about 7:30, I think, in the morning from Scranton, but we didn't get on the bus until about 8:15, 8:30, I think. And by then I had already gotten several texts from Greyhound saying it was unlikely that I would meet my connection at the Port Authority building. Anyway, the bus left late from Scranton. And on the way to the Port Authority building in New York, the driver missed an exit for buses going right directly into the Port Authority building. So we ended up in downtown Manhattan, sort of lost. It was the driver's first time driving in Manhattan. So we were orbiting downtown Manhattan. And if you've ever been there, you know traffic is bad. And if you're trying to get around in a car, it's bad. Getting around in a bus, trying to go around the block or something, it's even worse. Eventually, we ended up in a parking area near the Port Authority building. And by that time, a lot of people were frustrated with the trip. They had other things to do. They had schedules to keep. So then many of them got off the bus, and I decided to join them. I asked the local cop where the Port Authority building was and headed over in that direction with my bag and backpack. And when I got there, I found out that there was an airport shuttle from the Port Authority to the Newark airport. So I thought I would just go there, get an Uber from the airport to my hotel. I was going to get an Uber anyway, and that's what I did. The bus trip on Greyhound was not the interesting adventure that I thought it would be. It was just an annoying disaster, really. If I was actually on a tight schedule, I would have missed my plane. But luckily, because of the way I travel, I usually have a lot of time between travel segments. I don't like to be rushed when I'm on the road. I stayed at a nice hotel that night, and the next day I got to the Newark airport, boarded the plane, SQ-21, Singapore Airlines, direct flight from Newark to Singapore. It's the longest commercial aviation flight scheduled right now, and it took just a few minutes under 19 hours. And I made a video about that. You can watch that video up there at the top of the screen. It's 19 hours on a plane. I mean, there's not much to talk about. The entire plane, except for the business class, I believe, is premium economy. There are no economy seats, so you're not crammed together like you might be on a smaller aircraft. But anyway, that's enough about SQ-21. You can look up more if you want information about that. That's the flight number. Singapore Airlines, Flight 21, Newark to Singapore. So about 19 hours after leaving Newark, our plane landed in Singapore, which was not my final destination. I'm on my way to Kuala Lumpur, but I had about a 20-hour layover in Singapore. So I stayed at an airport hotel at the Singapore airport. Now, a lot of people around the world will say that Changi Airport in Singapore is the world's best airport. I don't know if it's the world's best. I haven't been to all of them. It is pretty nice. A lot of shops, a lot of shopping there. A lot of different food stalls or food restaurants. I guess they're not really stalls. But it is a fancy place. And the airport hotel is also fancy and expensive. But it was a money saver in a sense that if I had to go into town and find a hotel, I would probably be paying the same amount for the hotel, plus I'd have the added expense of a taxi into town and things like that. If I had to do it again, I probably would stay there again if I had a layover like that, only because of its convenience. If I do have to transit in Singapore again, I'll probably try to set it up where I have a much shorter layover, or else I'll make a longer layover where I could actually go into town and enjoy a little bit of Singapore. It's an interesting place to visit. It's a very expensive place, so I'm not going to stay there for any length of time, but it is a nice place to visit. So the next day, after staying overnight in the hotel at the Singapore airport, I boarded another plane for a very short flight, Kuala Lumpur. Singapore and Kuala Lumpur are about an hour apart by air. So Kuala Lumpur was my final destination. I arrived there, as I mentioned in my earlier video, a day early. Not because the transport was so fast, but because I made my reservations without really paying much attention to the calendar. So instead of checking into my Airbnb on the day I actually arrived in Malaysia, I took a hotel for one night and then checked into an Airbnb the next day. And that's where I stayed for most of my time in Malaysia. One of the major events that I was looking forward to on this trip was the wedding of Malaysian media superstar Grace H.R. Leng. And I made another very long video about that, which is linked up above. Lady Aisya, who you've seen in several other videos also, and I drove up to a town called Taiping, which is north of Kuala Lumpur, and went to Grace's wedding, which is a traditional Chinese wedding. Now, I had never been to a Chinese wedding before. And although there were some elements of it that I recognized from a typical Western wedding, there was a lot of stuff that went on that I did not understand. Grace. You probably don't recognize Grace. Normally she's wearing shorts and a t-shirt. There's more commotion inside the house. I think Aisya is as confused about what's happening as anybody else. From the looks on their face, I think they're lemon slices.
One, two, three. Okay, 我来一个。
Anyway, Grace is successfully married now. I'm not sure Malaysian media superstar Grace H.R. Leng is proper term for her anymore. Is there a name change in a Chinese wedding? Do we refer to her as Mrs. Grace H.R. Leng? Or is there some other way that they address themselves? Do they keep their name exactly the same? I don't know. It's just never come up before. But I've never been to Taiping before. Lady Aisya and I were wandering around the town quite a bit the night before in one of the recreational areas around Tasik Taiping, which is Lake Taiping. And then we had nasi kandar at one of the famous nasi kandar restaurants, and then went to the wedding the next day. Anyway, if you like that kind of video, just look for the one where Grace gets married. That's the name of the video. On November 1st, I flew from Kuala Lumpur to Chiang Mai. I stayed there for 2 weeks. Now, the reason I flew to Chiang Mai in the first place was because my stay in Kuala Lumpur was going to be a little over 3 months. And as an American, I'm allowed 90 days per entry to stay in Malaysia. Now, November 1st wasn't 90 days, but my total time in Malaysia was going to be longer. So I would have to leave the country and then come back in. So when I returned, I stayed at a different Airbnb in the same area as my first one, almost right in the center of the Bukit Bintang, or Bukit Bintang is the proper way to say it, tourist area. And I had to watch my step. I'm walking on a pathway that is paved mostly with large rocks. Anyway, that's where I spent the rest of my time in Malaysia. Once I returned to Thailand, I had about another month before I actually would leave and return to the United States. When I flew to Thailand, I flew on an airline called AirAsia, which I find to be one of the better airlines in Southeast Asia. It's very cheap, it's very efficient, and they try to do everything online, other than flying, of course. But I almost didn't take AirAsia because of the online nature of how they did their business. I had to make reservations in the AirAsia app. And the first thing that came up when I tried to do that was they were asking me to verify my account. And the way they did that, of course, is the way a lot of companies do it. They send you a text message, and then you have to enter the number that they send in the text message in the app, and then everything is verified. Unfortunately, as I found out months later, the AirAsia app system could not send a text message to several US carriers, phone carriers. I use Mint Mobile, which is associated with T-Mobile, and they could not send a text message to a T-Mobile number. And they did fix it, but for a long time, it just really was something that they could not fix. And nobody really understood why they couldn't fix it or even what the real problem was. I could not verify my account on the phone app. So I had to use the laptop app to actually make the reservation, which was not a problem. But then I started to realize that I wouldn't be able to check in. I wouldn't be able to do anything unless the app was verified on my phone. So after a frustrating couple of weeks going back and forth with AirAsia tech support, I told them, look, I'm going to give you one more week. If it's not fixed by then, I'm just going to delete the app from my phone and walk away from AirAsia. There are other airlines I could have used to fly from Kuala Lumpur to Chiang Mai. So I was fully prepared to do that. And lo and behold, I tried to check in 2 days before my flight to Chiang Mai on AirAsia, and the app asked me for my phone number, again, as it always did. I sent it, I got the text with the verification code, verified my app on the phone, and everything was fine. Now, I'm not pretending that my threat to delete the app from my phone spurred them into action, but they did finally get it fixed. And AirAsia remains one of my favorite airlines. As many of you know, I do a lot of travel based on points. So I use American Express to get points in my account. On this particular trip, I charged all my flight tickets and all my hotel and Airbnb stays on my American Express card and just racked up points that way. I didn't spend any points like I did on my South American trip, so I have those to use some other day. In Kuala Lumpur and Chiang Mai, I use mostly cash. I like to eat foods from street stalls, so that's a cash-only business. I can't imagine a street stall in Kuala Lumpur taking credit cards, so I use cash for that. Now, the way I got cash is I used my ATM card and just took it out of an ATM. I alerted my bank that I was traveling in Malaysia so that when they saw the withdrawal from a Malaysian or a Thai bank, they wouldn't reject the withdrawal or put a hold on my card. With First Mid Illinois, I never had any problems, and I would draw local money from an ATM using my US bank account ATM card. For SIM cards for my phone, I once again used AirAsia and used eSims for Malaysia and Thailand. I think I bought 2 or 3 eSims while I was in Malaysia, because I bought one and the most you can get them for is 30 days. And you can top up and get more for maybe another 30 days or a week or something like that. And then I bought another SIM card when I was in Thailand. These are eSIMs, by the way. They're not actually physical cards. If you're traveling with a newer phone, your phone can probably use eSIMs, which takes a lot of the hassle out of getting a SIM card in a foreign country. You just order it or buy it before you go. It's just code that's downloaded onto your phone. Activate it, and then when you land in your new country, you turn your phone on and your eSIM will spring into action. Find a network to attach itself to, and you've got data. And I explained in another video, which I will link at the top of the screen, how you do that, your phone settings and things like that. So if you're interested in doing that, there's a lot of videos on YouTube that'll help you out there. And also my video will help you out there. But the only other thing I want to talk about is my trip home. I left from Kuala Lumpur on December 16th and arrived back in northeastern Pennsylvania on December 17th. And I did not fly Singapore Airlines all the way back to Newark. I flew Singapore from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore, and then United from Singapore to San Francisco to Newark, and then finally into Avoca. The trip from Singapore to San Francisco was fairly uneventful. It's just a long haul flight. I think it was 13 hours. But from San Francisco to Newark, it was on a smaller plane. It's a domestic flight. And if you've ever flown in the United States on a domestic flight, then you know that luggage space in the cabin is at a premium. By the time I boarded, they were announcing that anybody with a roller bag or a bag bigger than a backpack or a purse would have to check their bag at the door. There's 2 things that you have to keep in mind. There are certain people that like to fly without checking any luggage. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. The first is they're afraid that the airline is going to lose it, which to be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't really happen that often. It's not a valid concern. The second thing is they don't want to pay for it. Okay, I get that part. But then, and we've all been on planes where this has happened, people come on the plane, they're carrying a roller bag, a giant roller bag that can probably carry everything they own in, and they think they're going to get it into the overhead bin. That means that there's no room in the overhead bin for anybody else in their area. You don't want to be that guy. Now, the other half of this, of course, is the airline. It's the airline problem also. They don't like taking your bag away from you and putting it in the luggage area, but it's a problem that they create by not enforcing any of their own rules. If they tell you you can carry on one bag and a small personal item, the one bag does not mean something that's a 40-liter backpack that weighs 50 pounds. When I fly AirAsia, for example, the airline I talked about a few minutes ago, they weigh your carry-on bag. If it's more than 7 kilos, you don't get on the plane with it. You have to pay for it, and it's put in with all the other luggage. They're very strict on that, and there's plenty of room in the AirAsia airplanes for overhead storage because they don't allow giant bags onto the plane, and they charge for bags that are overweight or that should be checked in the first place. Finally, I know you're all dying to hear about what my luggage weight was on this trip. And even though I was carrying fancy dress clothes for the Malaysian media superstar Grace H.R. Leng's wedding, I was still able to keep my main bag, the one I checked, under 10 kilos. It was 9.5 kilos. So I'm very happy with that. If I didn't have my dress clothes for the wedding in the bag, I probably would have been down around 9 or even 8.5 kilos. Anyway, that's it for my Asian tour debrief in 2023. Until next time, be seeing you.
Sit.